Welcome to the Galactic Cartography Academy, the most prestigious mapping institution in the known universe, located on the gleaming space station Epsilon Prime. Picture this, a massive rotating wheel of chrome and crystal, floating serenely in the void, where the galaxy's brightest minds come to learn the fine art of not getting lost in space. The tuition costs roughly equivalent to a small planet's GDP, and the waiting list is longer than most civilizations have existed. The Academy's lecture halls are architectural marvels, with holographic displays that could make a dying star look like a screensaver, and desks made from materials so rare that entire wars have been fought over them. The students? Well, they're exactly what you'd expect from an institution that charges admission in rare isotopes. And then there's Luna Martinez. Luna sits in the back corner of advanced stellar cartography, looking about as out of place as a paper airplane in a fighter jet squadron. While her classmates arrived via luxury shuttles piloted by servants, Luna hitchhiked on a cargo freighter carrying processed algae. Her desk is the only one without a built-in quantum computer, holographic projector, or interdimensional storage compartment. Instead, she has what appears to be a battered spiral notebook, 3 pencils of varying sharpness, and a calculator that probably predates faster-than-light travel. Professor Vextar glides to the front of the classroom on his 8 tentacles, each one ending in what looks like a different high-tech gadget. He's a cephalopodian, from the Andromeda sector, about 7 feet tall when fully extended, with skin that shifts colors based on his mood. Right now, he's a lovely shade of condescending purple. "Students," Vextar announces, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from having published 17 papers on quantum navigation theory. "Today we begin preparation for your final assessment." The class straightens up, expensive cybernetic implants humming to life. Well, most of the class straightens up. Luna continues doodling what appears to be a surprisingly accurate sketch of the local star cluster in her notebook's margin. To Luna's left sits Zephyr, a crystalline being from the Sigma Quadrant whose body literally sparkles with integrated circuitry. Zephyr's species doesn't just use technology, they basically are technology. The sound of data processing emanates from Zephyr like a constant electronic purr. To her right, there's Quirk, a gelatinous blob creature from somewhere in the Outer Rim whose species name is unpronounceable by most vocal cords in the galaxy. Quirk constantly shifts between colors and shapes when nervous, which is essentially always. Right now, Quirk resembles an anxious purple pudding with eyes. The mapping of unknown sectors requires precision beyond the capabilities of lesser civilizations. Professor Vextar continues, shooting a pointed look at Luna. "This is why we use only the most advanced cartographic technology available." Luna looks up from her notebook just long enough to raise an eyebrow, then goes back to her doodling. She's sketching what looks suspiciously like a detailed map of the Academy's ventilation system. Zephyr leans over, circuits flickering with amusement. "Is that human actually taking notes with a writing implement made of wood and graphite?" "Technically," Quirk whispers back, wobbling nervously, "it's likely a composite material with polymer binding agents, and—" "It's a pencil, Quirk," Luna says without looking up. "Humans have been using them for centuries. They don't crash when exposed to electromagnetic pulses. They work in zero atmosphere, and the only power source they need is my hand." The nearby students exchanged looks that somehow managed to be both pitying and amazed. Here they are, surrounded by mapping technology that could chart an entire galaxy in real time, and the human is bragging about her pencil. Professor Vextar's tentacles writhe with what passes for excitement among his species, which looks disturbingly like someone untangling Christmas lights in zero gravity. "This year's final assessment," he announces, "will be the mapping of Nebula Sector 7. The class erupts in excited chittering, beeping, and what sounds like several students downloading updates directly into their brains. Nebula Sector 7 is legendary among cartographers, a swirling maze of gas clouds, electromagnetic storms, and spatial anomalies that has defeated more mapping expeditions than most species care to count. You will work in teams," Vextar continues, "utilizing the finest equipment the Academy has to offer. Victory in this competition earns the winner a prestigious internship with the Galactic Survey Corps." Now that gets everyone's attention. The Galactic Survey Corps doesn't just hand out internships, they hand out the kind of career opportunities that make entire civilizations jealous. Zephyr's crystalline form practically vibrates with anticipation as several panels slide open across their chests, revealing what appears to be enough computing power to run a small moon. "I have already calculated 17 different approaches using my quantum matrix probability engines," Zephyr announces to anyone within hearing range. From across the room, A student that looks like a walking telescope begins assembling what appears to be a dimensional scanner the size of a small vehicle. Another student, whose species evolved from sentient mathematics, starts projecting holographic equations that hurt to look at directly. The preparation frenzy reaches fever pitch when someone activates a mapping device that immediately begins scanning everyone in the room and producing detailed three-dimensional models of their internal organs. Professor Vexstar quickly intervenes before things get even more uncomfortable. And what does Luna do during this impressive display of technological superiority? She flips to a fresh page in her notebook, tests her pencil lead by drawing a small circle, and starts sketching what looks like a rough outline of the nebula from memory. The laughter starts slowly, like the first few drops of rain before a storm. It begins with Zephyr's electronic chuckling, spreads to a few nearby students, and soon the entire classroom is filled with the sounds of various species expressing amusement in their own unique ways. "Oh, this is rich," snorts a student whose species apparently evolved from aggressive crystals. The human thinks she can map one of the most dangerous regions in known space with a notebook. "Perhaps," suggests another student helpfully, "we should inform her that Sector 7 covers approximately 12,000 cubic light-years of space." Luna looks up from her drawing with the kind of patient expression usually reserved for explaining basic concepts to small children. 12,417 cubic light-years, actually. And that's assuming standard measurement protocols, which probably don't account for the temporal distortion near the pulsar cluster. The laughter dies down a bit. Several students exchange glances. "Lucky guess," mutters Zephyr, though their circuits flicker uncertainly. Professor Vexstar slithers closer to Luna's desk, his skin shifting to a skeptical shade of orange. "Miss Martinez, while I admire your enthusiasm, perhaps you should consider partnering with a student who possesses appropriate equipment." "Thanks, but I'm good," Luna says, continuing to sketch. "Though I do have one question about the mission parameters." "Yes? Are we mapping for navigation purposes, resource identification, or hazard assessment?" The professor's tentacles pause mid-wave. Well, that is, comprehensive mapping, naturally." "Right, but see, those require completely different approaches and methodologies. Navigation mapping prioritizes stable reference points and safe passage routes. Resource mapping focuses on density analysis and extraction feasibility. Hazard assessment emphasizes threat identification and risk mitigation protocols." The classroom has gone completely silent. Even the student whose equipment was humming with background radiation has somehow managed to turn down the volume. Luna continues sketching while she talks. "I'm just wondering, because most of your high-tech scanning equipment is optimized for one specific type of analysis, whereas a comprehensive approach requires..." She trails off, looking around the room at all the staring faces. "What? Did I say something wrong?" The silence stretches for exactly 4.7 seconds, which Zephyr helpfully announces because their species apparently can't help but calculate everything. Then Professor Vexstar's skin shifts back to purple, and the moment passes like a minor glitch in the Matrix. "Yes, well..." Vexstar clears what passes for his throat. "I'm sure Ms. Martinez will figure out the appropriate approach once she sees how real cartography is conducted. And oh boy, do her classmates ever want to show her how it's done." What follows can only be described as the most expensive episode of Keeping Up with the Joneses in galactic history. Zephyr's crystalline form splits open like a high-tech flower, revealing layer after layer of computing matrices that would make a supercomputer weep with envy. The processing power humming through their body could probably simulate the birth and death of entire star systems. "My quantum probability engines," Zephyr announces proudly, "can calculate gravitational influences across 17 dimensions simultaneously while accounting for temporal flux variations." Not to be outdone, the telescope-looking student extends mechanical arms that unfold like the world's most complicated Swiss Army knife. "My species has been perfecting stellar cartography for over 40,000 years, they declare through what sounds like a very expensive sound system. This device can detect spatial anomalies smaller than a proton, from distances exceeding 12 parsecs. Luna glances up from her notebook, where she's now sketching what appears to be a detailed cross-section of nebula formation patterns. "That's nice. What happens when the electromagnetic interference disrupts your quantum coherence field?" "That's impossible," Zephyr responds immediately. "My systems are shielded against all known forms of..." "What about unknown forms?" Another uncomfortable pause. Luna goes back to her drawing. The competitive escalation continues with a student who looks like a walking mathematics equation, producing holographic displays that make reality seem quaint by comparison. Their three-dimensional projections show real-time stellar mechanics with such precision that watching them feels like having access to the universe's source code. Observe, they announce in a voice that sounds like numbers having an argument, as I demonstrate quantum-scale gravitational mapping with temporal prediction algorithms. The holographic display is genuinely impressive, showing how gas clouds will move through the nebula over the next several million years. It's the kind of demonstration that would make most civilizations surrender their entire scientific communities in exchange for the technology. Luna looks up, studies the projection for about 3 seconds, and then raises her hand. Your calculations assume uniform particle density throughout the nebula. But what about the density variations caused by stellar wind from that Class B giant on the outer edge? Mathematics June's holographic display flickers. The stellar wind variations are accounted for in the baseline parameters. Right, but stellar wind isn't uniform either. It fluctuates based on the star's magnetic field rotation, which has a cycle of approximately 14 standard days. Your projection shows the nebula state 6 months from now, but doesn't account for how those fluctuations will affect particle distribution over time. The holographic display flickers more noticeably. Several equations start blinking red. That's a very minor consideration, mathematics student says, though their voice now sounds less like confident numbers and more like numbers having an anxiety attack. Sure, Luna agrees pleasantly, returning to her sketch. Probably won't affect navigation or resource assessment at all. By now, even the students who weren't initially participating in the technological show-off session feel compelled to prove their superiority over the human with the notebook. Someone produces a device that can apparently scan through parallel dimensions. Another student reveals equipment that measures quantum probability states in real time. The most impressive display comes from a student whose species appears to have evolved from living crystals and pure mathematics having a complicated relationship. They create a holographic representation of the entire nebula that's so detailed it includes individual particle trajectories and electromagnetic field fluctuations, updated in real time. This, they announce with the kind of pride usually reserved for parents showing off baby pictures, represents the pinnacle of cartographic technology. Every particle tracked, every energy fluctuation monitored, every spatial anomaly cataloged, with precision approaching theoretical perfection. The display is genuinely breathtaking. It shows the nebula as a living, breathing entity of swirling gases and cosmic forces, with data streams flowing like digital rivers through space itself. Luna studies it carefully, pencil tapping against her notebook. It's beautiful, she says sincerely. Really impressive work. Quick question though, how much power does it require? Approximately the energy output of a small sun, but that's easily supplied by our fusion generators. And if those generators fail? Bailey won't fail. Triple redundancy systems, quantum stabilized power cores, backup systems for the backup systems. But if they did, a pause. Well, theoretically, the system would shut down, but that scenario is statistically impossible. Luna nods thoughtfully and makes a small note in her notebook. In the margin, barely visible, she writes, "Backup plan, pencil." Throughout this entire display of technological superiority, Quirk has been nervously shifting colors like a living mood ring stuck in an anxiety loop. The blob creature keeps glancing between Luna's simple notebook and the incredible devices surrounding them, occasionally making small, worried gurgling sounds. Finally, Quirk can't contain the curiosity any longer and wobbles over to Luna's desk during a brief pause in the technological showmanship. "Luna?" Quirk whispers, currently resembling nervous green jello. "Not that I'm questioning your methods, but are you sure that notebook approach is going to work? I mean, these devices can literally map quantum fluctuations across dimensional boundaries." Luna looks up from her sketch, which now covers 3 pages and appears to show wind patterns, gravitational influences, and what looks suspiciously like safe navigation routes through the nebula. "Quirk," she says gently, "let me ask you something. When your species first started exploring space, before you had all this fancy equipment, how did you navigate?" "Well, we used stellar positioning and gravitational mapping, but that was thousands of years ago when we were still primitive." And Quirk stops mid-sentence, turning a thoughtful shade of orange. "Exactly," Luna says, returning to her drawing. "Sometimes the old ways work because they have to work, not because they're fancy." She pauses, pencil hovering over the paper. "Besides," she adds with a grin that suggests she knows something everyone else doesn't, "you'd be surprised how much you can figure out just by paying attention." 3 days later, the Academy's launch bay resembles a high-tech circus, where every performer is trying to outdo the others with increasingly elaborate acts. Survey ships gleam under the artificial lighting, each one loaded with enough computational power to run a small civilization. The air hums with the sound of final equipment checks, last-minute calibrations, and the nervous energy of students about to put their reputations on the line. Zephyr's ship looks less like a vehicle and more like a flying computer with engines attached. Crystalline matrices cover every surface, pulsing with data streams that create patterns beautiful enough to make artists weep. The ship's hull is transparent in places, revealing layers of quantum processors working in perfect harmony. It's the kind of craft that doesn't just survey space, it analyzes it down to the subatomic level. Final systems check complete, Zephyr announces, their voice now accompanied by what sounds like a choir of harmonizing supercomputers. All 17 quantum matrix arrays operating at peak efficiency. Probability calculations running continuously across 43 parallel processing cores. The telescope student's ship is equally impressive, bristling with scanning arrays that extend like metal flowers seeking cosmic sunlight. Each scanner is calibrated to detect different phenomena, from gravitational waves to exotic matter signatures. The ship rotates slowly as automated systems perform pre-light diagnostics, and every few seconds, another mechanical arm extends to adjust some piece of equipment. The mathematics student's vessel defies several laws of physics just by existing. It's covered in holographic projectors that create a constantly shifting display of equations and data visualizations around the entire ship. Watching it is like seeing pure mathematics come to life and decide to go exploring. And then there's Luna's assigned survey ship, which looks exactly like what it is, standard Academy equipment with no modifications whatsoever. It has basic scanners, standard navigation equipment, and life support systems that have been reliable for decades without being particularly exciting about it. Luna boards carrying exactly 3 things: her notebook, her pencils, and a thermos of coffee that she claims is essential for proper cartographic work. Professor Vextar oversees the launch preparations with the kind of nervous energy that comes from knowing his students are about to venture into one of the most dangerous regions of known space. His tentacles wave instructions to launch control, while his skin cycles through various shades of administrative anxiety. "Remember," he calls out over the intercom, "Nebula Sector 7 is classified as a Class 5 hazard zone. Maintain communication protocols, follow safety procedures, and do not, under any circumstances, venture beyond the established perimeter without proper authorization." The ships launch in formation, a glittering convoy of technological marvels heading toward the swirling chaos of Nebula Sector 7. For the first few hours, everything goes exactly according to plan. The various scanning systems come online smoothly, communication remains clear, and the students begin their initial survey work with confidence. Zephyr's ship reaches the nebula's outer edge first, quantum processors humming with anticipation. The first scans come back clean, showing normal gas density distributions and expected electromagnetic signatures. "Initial readings are nominal," Zephyr reports over the comm system. "Beginning deep structure analysis now." That's when things start going sideways. The first sign of trouble comes from mathematics students' vessel. Their holographic displays, which had been showing clean, orderly equations, suddenly start flickering with error messages. "I'm getting some anomalous readings," they report, though their voice still sounds like numbers trying to remain calm. "The mathematical models are showing inconsistencies in the gravitational field mapping." "Define inconsistencies," Professor Vextar's voice crackles over the comm system. "Well, according to my calculations, there's a gravitational anomaly that appears to be located in 17 different places simultaneously." "That's impossible." "Yes, that's what I keep telling my computers, but they insist the math is correct." Over on Zephyr's ship, the quantum processors are starting to produce results that violate several fundamental laws of physics. The crystalline matrices, which had been pulsing in perfect harmony, begin flickering erratically as contradictory data floods through the system. "I'm showing massive electromagnetic interference," Zephyr reports, their voice now accompanied by what sounds like computers having a nervous breakdown. "The quantum coherence fields are destabilizing. My probability engines can't agree on whether we're actually here or just think we are." The telescope student situation isn't much better. Their precision scanners, calibrated to detect anomalies smaller than a proton, are now detecting anomalies so large they apparently extend into parallel dimensions. "My instruments are picking up gravitational signatures that suggest the presence of a black hole, a neutron star, and a birthday party, all occupying the same coordinates." "A birthday party?" Professor Vextar asks weakly. The scanners are very confused right now. Meanwhile, Luna's basic survey ship putters along at the back of the formation, its simple instruments providing exactly the kind of straightforward data they were designed to deliver. Gas density, moderate. Electromagnetic activity, elevated but stable. Navigation hazards, several but clearly marked by the ship's standard warning systems. Luna herself sits at the observation port, notebook open, sketching what she sees with her own eyes. Her drawing shows the nebula not as a collection of data points and sensor readings, but as a living, breathing cosmic phenomenon with patterns and flows that tell a story about how it formed and how it behaves. Interesting, she murmurs to herself, making notes in the margin. The gas streams are following magnetic field lines, but there's definitely something affecting the flow patterns on the eastern edge. Over the comm system, the situation with the high-tech survey ships continues to deteriorate. Zephyr's quantum processors are now producing results that suggest the nebula exists in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously being 3 different nebulae until observed. Mathematics students' holographic displays have started showing equations that hurt to look at and occasionally spell out what appear to be cries for help in various alien languages. The telescope students' scanners have given up entirely and are now just repeatedly displaying error messages in languages that haven't been invented yet. L ships, return to formation, Professor Vextar orders, his voice tight with the kind of concern that comes from watching expensive equipment have a collective nervous breakdown. We may need to abort the mission and reconsider our approach. Actually, Luna's voice comes over the comm system, calm and clear. I think I know what's happening. The chatter from the other ships immediately stops. You do? Professor Vextar asks. Yeah, it's actually pretty straightforward once you account for the pulsar interference. See, there's a neutron star about 40 light-years spinward that's been throwing off everyone's magnetic field calculations. The electromagnetic pulses are creating interference patterns that make your quantum scanners think they're seeing multiple overlapping realities. Silence on the comm system. Also, Luna continues, whoever programmed the gravitational mapping algorithms apparently didn't account for the fact that nebulae aren't static. This one's rotating, which means the gravitational signature keeps shifting. Your computers are trying to map a moving target using calculations designed for stationary objects. More silence. The good news is that once you know what to look for, the actual navigation is pretty straightforward. The gas flows follow predictable patterns, and there are several stable corridors that avoid the worst of the electromagnetic interference. Quirk's voice comes over the comm, sounding like a nervous but hopeful pudding. Luna, are you saying you've actually mapped safe routes through the nebula? Well, yeah, I mean, it's not complete yet, but I've got the basic structure figured out. There's this really interesting spiral formation in the central region that creates natural navigation channels. Plus, there are some resource deposits here that I'm pretty sure nobody's ever cataloged before. The comm system stays quiet for a long moment. Then Professor Vextar's voice comes through, very carefully controlled. Miss Martinez, are you telling me that while our most advanced scanning equipment is producing unusable data, you have successfully mapped navigable routes through one of the most dangerous regions in known space, using a notebook and pencil? And coffee, Luna adds helpfully. The coffee's really important for this kind of work. In the background, the sound of very expensive equipment continuing to malfunction serves as a cosmic soundtrack to what might be the most expensive lesson in humility the galaxy has ever witnessed. The return to Epsilon Prime is what military historians might generously call a strategic withdrawal, and what everyone else would call a barely controlled retreat. The convoy of survey ships limps back to the Academy like wounded birds, their once gleaming hull now bearing the scars of electromagnetic interference and the kind of system failures that make engineers wake up screaming. Zephyr's crystalline ship, which had departed looking like a flying computer from the future, now resembles a disco ball having an existential crisis. Half the quantum processors are displaying error messages in colors that don't technically exist, while the other half have started calculating the mathematical probability of their own existence, and apparently don't like the results. Mathematics students' vessel trails behind, its holographic projectors flickering weakly as they attempt to display equations that keep solving themselves incorrectly. Occasionally a projection will show what appears to be a mathematical proof that 2 + 2 = purple, accompanied by a sad electronic beeping sound. The telescope student's ship has retracted all its scanning arrays, after they began detecting phenomena that violate so many laws of physics that several of them had to be temporarily suspended just to allow the ship to continue existing. Only Luna's standard-issue survey ship returns in the same condition it left, puttering along at the back of the formation like the one friend who didn't drink at the party and now has to drive everyone else home. The Academy's main auditorium has been prepared for the final presentations, with all the pomp and circumstance befitting such a prestigious competition. Holographic displays cover every surface, ready to showcase the students' cartographic achievements. Representatives from the Galactic Survey Corps sit in the front row, their various species united in expressions of professional interest, and the kind of skepticism that comes from having seen too many promising young cartographers crash and burn in the void of space. Professor Vexter takes the podium, his tentacles writhing with what can charitably be called nervous energy. His skin cycles through various shades of administrative anxiety as he surveys the assembled crowd. Esteemed colleagues, honored representatives and students, he begins. Today we witness the culmination of our most challenging cartographic assessment. Each team will now present their mapping results from Nebula Sector 7. Zephyr goes first, their crystalline form still flickering with residual system errors. The holographic display they attempt to project looks like abstract art created by a computer having a nervous breakdown. Swirling patterns of data cascade across the screen, occasionally forming what might be recognizable stellar formations before dissolving into mathematical chaos. As you can see, Zephyr says, their voice accompanied by what sounds like electronic weeping, the quantum matrix analysis revealed that Nebula Sector 7 exists in a state of, they pause, consulting their notes, undefined cosmic uncertainty. Could you be more specific? Asks one of the Galactic Survey Corps representatives, a being whose species apparently evolved from sentient skepticism. Well, according to my calculations, the nebula is simultaneously 3 different sizes, located in 17 different places, and may or may not actually exist depending on who's observing it. I see. And the practical navigation implications? Zephyr's circuits flicker uncertainly. Don't go there? The mathematics student's presentation doesn't fare much better. Their holographic equations keep rewriting themselves mid-explanation, occasionally producing proofs that space is actually flat, round, and shaped like their grandmother's favorite cooking pot, all at the same time. The mathematical models clearly indicate, they announce with the confidence of someone who hasn't looked at their own data, that conventional navigation through the sector is, they glance at their display, where an equation is currently proving that up is sideways, mathematically inadvisable. Did you identify any safe passage routes? Asks another Corps representative. Safe is a relative concept. That depends on your frame of reference and whether you believe in the fundamental consistency of mathematical reality. The presentations continue in this vein, each more disappointing than the last. Students who had boarded their ships with enough technological firepower to map entire galaxies return with data that suggests the universe might be having an identity crisis. Finally, it's Luna's turn. She walks to the podium carrying nothing but her battered notebook, looking completely relaxed in a room full of beings whose careers depend on the precise mapping of cosmic phenomena. The holographic displays around the auditorium remain dark as she opens her notebook to a page covered in hand-drawn sketches and handwritten notes. Right, she says, so here's what I found. She holds up a detailed drawing that shows the nebula as a 3-dimensional spiral structure with clearly marked navigation channels, resource deposits, and hazard zones. The sketch is incredibly detailed, showing gas flow patterns, electromagnetic field lines, and what appear to be safe harboring points for ships needing to make repairs. Nebula Sector 7 is actually a rotating stellar nursery about 3 million years old, Luna begins, as if she's discussing the weather. It's got this really interesting spiral structure that creates natural navigation corridors if you know how to read the gas flow patterns. And she flips to another page, showing a cross-section view with detailed annotations. The electromagnetic interference that was messing up everyone's equipment comes from a pulsar about 40 light-years spinward. The pulses hit the nebula every 1.7 seconds and create standing wave patterns in the ionized gas. If you time your approach correctly, you can use these waves like cosmic highway lanes. The auditorium has gone completely silent. Even the ventilation system seems to be holding its breath. Luna continues, completely oblivious to the stunned attention she's receiving. The really cool part is this central region here. She points to an area of her drawing that shows concentric circles with detailed flow patterns. It's a stellar formation zone where new stars are actually being born. I mapped at least 17 protostars in various stages of development, plus 3 that are probably going to go supernova in the next few thousand years. One of the Galactic Survey Corps representatives leans forward. Ms. Martinez, are you saying you identified active stellar formation zones and predicted supernova events using visual observation and hand-drawn maps? Well, yeah. The signs are pretty obvious once you know what to look for. Stellar formation creates these distinctive gravitational eddies in the gas flows, and pre-supernova stars have these characteristic electromagnetic signatures. Plus, You can actually see the gas compression patterns if you watch how the nebula's structure changes over time. Over time? Professor Vextar interjects, his tentacles frozen mid-wave. Miss Martinez, you were only in the sector for 12 hours. Luna looks up from her notebook with the expression of someone who's just realized she might need to explain something obvious. Right, but nebulae aren't static. They're constantly moving and evolving. If you observe the current structure and apply some basic stellar mechanics, you can extrapolate the formation history and predict future changes. It's kind of like reading the rings in a tree, except the tree is made of ionized gas and spans several light years. She flips to yet another page, this one showing what appears to be a detailed resource survey. Oh, and I found some really interesting mineral deposits. There are at least 3 asteroid fields with heavy element concentrations that nobody's mapped before, plus what looks like a rogue planet with some seriously unusual isotope signatures. The Galactic Survey Corps representative who had been leaning forward is now practically falling out of their chair. You identified unmapped resource deposits and navigation hazards, Luna adds helpfully, turning to a page covered with warning symbols and safety notes. There are some gravitational anomalies in the outer spiral arms that could really mess up your day if you're not expecting them. Plus, the electromagnetic storms in the central region follow predictable patterns, so you can time your passage to avoid the worst of them. She closes the notebook and looks around the auditorium at all the staring faces. I've got detailed route maps, resource locations, hazard assessments, and recommended safety protocols. The whole sector is actually pretty navigable once you understand how it works. The silence stretches on until Quirk, who has been wobbling nervously in the back row, finally works up the courage to ask the question everyone's thinking. Luna, Court's voice carries clearly through the quiet auditorium. How did you do all of that with just a notebook and pencil? Luna smiled with the kind of genuine warmth usually reserved for explaining something wonderful to a curious child. Easy. I paid attention to what I was seeing instead of trying to make reality fit into pre-programmed assumptions. Your fancy scanners kept looking for data points that matched their programming, but they couldn't adapt when the nebula didn't behave the way they expected. She opens her notebook again, showing pages covered with observations written in neat handwriting alongside detailed sketches. Human cartographers learned a long time ago that the best maps come from actually observing the territory, not just measuring it. We look for patterns, relationships, and changes over time. We ask questions like, why does the gas flow this way? And what would happen if that star went supernova? Instead of just recording that gas is flowing and stars exist. Professor Vextar's skin has shifted to a pale shade of stunned realization. Miss Martinez, are you telling us that human cartographic methods are based on observational analysis and pattern recognition rather than purely technological measurement? Well, yeah, technology's great for collecting data, but somebody still has to interpret what that data means. And sometimes the most important information isn't something you can scan for, it's something you have to understand. She gestures toward her notebook. Like none of your equipment could tell you that the nebula is rotating because it's still in the process of collapsing from its original formation. That's not something you measure, it's something you figure out by watching how the different parts move relative to each other and asking yourself what kind of forces would create those movement patterns. The Galactic Survey Corps representatives are now whispering urgently among themselves, occasionally glancing at Luna's notebook with expressions that suggest they're reconsidering several fundamental assumptions about how cartography works. Finally, the lead representative stands up. Ms. Martinez, would you be willing to verify your mapping results against our classified deep space survey data? Sure, Luna says cheerfully, though I should mention that your classified data probably doesn't include the stuff I found in the central formation zone. That area has been considered too dangerous to survey, so most of your information is probably based on long-range observations from outside the nebula. The representative's expression shifts to something between amazement and the kind of professional excitement that comes from discovering something genuinely new. Miss Martinez, if your observations are accurate, you may have just provided us with more actionable intelligence about Sector 7 than we've gathered in the last 50 years of remote surveying. Luna shrugs modestly. It's really not that complicated once you get the hang of it, though I do have to admit, the coffee helped. Proper cartography requires a lot of patience and attention to detail. In the stunned silence that follows, the sound of very expensive equipment being quietly shut down echoes through the auditorium, like a technological funeral march. The verification process takes exactly 47 minutes and 32 seconds, which is remarkably fast considering they're cross-referencing Luna's hand-drawn maps against 50 years of classified Galactic Survey Corps data. The representatives huddle around their portable verification terminals, their expressions cycling through disbelief, amazement, and what appears to be existential confusion about the nature of technological superiority. The lead representative, whose species apparently evolved from a combination of professional skepticism and bureaucratic efficiency, finally stands up, with the kind of expression usually reserved for announcing that the laws of physics have filed for early retirement. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of various classifications," they announce to the assembled crowd, "we have completed our verification analysis of Miss Martinez's cartographic survey." The auditorium holds its collective breath, which, in the case of several species, involves some truly interesting respiratory gymnastics. Miss Martinez's hand-drawn maps are not only accurate, they are more comprehensive and detailed than any survey data we currently possess for Nebula Sector 7. The representative pauses, consulting their terminal. Furthermore, her identification of previously unknown stellar formation zones, resource deposits, and navigational hazards has been confirmed through emergency deep space reconnaissance. Professor Vextar's tentacles have gone completely limp and his skin has shifted to a shade of beige that probably doesn't have a name in most languages. Several students appear to be reconsidering their life choices, their expensive equipment, and possibly the fundamental nature of reality itself. Additionally, the representative continues, Miss Martinez's predictive analysis regarding electromagnetic storm patterns and gravitational anomalies has allowed us to identify 3 previously undetected navigation hazards that posed significant risks to commercial shipping routes. Zephyr's crystalline form has stopped flickering entirely and now resembles a very expensive paperweight experiencing an identity crisis. Mathematics student appears to be running calculations that keep proving their equipment doesn't exist. The telescope student has retracted so far into their shell that only a faint beeping sound indicates they're still conscious. In recognition of these achievements, the representative declares, the Galactic Survey Corps is pleased to offer Miss Luna Martinez the prestigious cartographic internship position. The applause that follows is the kind of polite, stunned clapping usually reserved for witnessing someone perform impossible feats of cosmic significance while making it look easy. Luna stands up, notebook still in hand, and does something that catches everyone completely off guard. "Thank you, that's really generous," she says. "But I'd like to suggest something different." The applause stops abruptly. Professor Vextar's skin shifts to a new shade that might be called administrative panic. "Different?" the Corps representative asks carefully. "See? The thing is, I didn't do this alone. Quarkier has been asking really good questions throughout the whole process, and their species' understanding of 3-dimensional spatial relationships is actually incredibly sophisticated." Luna gestures toward Quark, who immediately turns bright purple and begins wobbling frantically. "What Luna is saying," Quark manages to gurgle, "is that I mostly just watched her work and occasionally provided moral support in the form of worried color changes." "Right, but you also caught that discrepancy in the electromagnetic field measurements that helped me realize the pulsar timing was off," Luna counters. "Plus, your questions about quantum field interactions made me think about how the stellar formation zones were affecting local space-time curvature." The Corps representative looks back and forth between Luna and the frantically color-shifting Quark. "Miss Martinez, are you suggesting a joint internship?" "I'm suggesting that good cartography isn't a solo activity. The best maps come from combining different perspectives and skill sets. Quark's spatial analysis abilities complement my observational methods. Together, we could probably map regions that would challenge either of us working alone." Quark has now shifted to a shade of orange that suggests surprise mixed with gratitude and a healthy dose of terror. "Luna, are you sure about this? I mean, my equipment didn't work any better than anyone else's." "Quark, you spent the entire mission asking questions about things that didn't make sense instead of trying to force reality to match your preconceptions. That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes good cartography work." The Corps representative confers quietly with their colleagues, occasionally glancing at Luna and the still wobbling Quark. Finally, they nod. "Very well. The Galactic Survey Corps is pleased to offer joint internship positions to Miss Martinez and... I apologize, what is your preferred designation?" "Quark is fine," Quark manages, now resembling happy yellow pudding with anxiety sprinkles. The applause this time is warmer, more genuine, and accompanied by what sounds like several students quietly questioning their career choices and equipment budgets. Professor Vextar approaches the podium, his tentacles moving with the careful precision of someone trying to maintain professional dignity while processing a fundamental paradigm shift. "Miss Martinez," he says, "I believe I owe you an apology, and perhaps, A request? What kind of request? Well, Vextar's skin shifts to what might be called academic curiosity with a side of humble pie. It occurs to me that our cartography curriculum may be somewhat limited in its approach to observational methodology. Luna tilts her head, waiting for him to continue. Would you be interested in developing a supplementary course on traditional observational techniques? Something that might help our students understand how to interpret data rather than simply collect it. The grin that spreads across Luna's face is the kind usually reserved for children who've just been told they can stay up past bedtime and have ice cream for dinner. Professor, I would love that, though I should warn you, proper observational cartography requires a lot more than just looking at things. Students would need to learn stellar mechanics, gravitational theory, electromagnetic field dynamics, and about a dozen other subjects that most people think are separate from mapping. Separate from mapping. Zephyr's voice carries a note of electronic confusion. Sure, most cartographers think their job is just to record where things are, but if you want to make maps that are actually useful, you need to understand why things are where they are, how they got there, and where they're likely to go next. Luna opens her notebook, showing pages covered with interconnected diagrams, like you can't properly map a nebula without understanding stellar formation theory. You can't chart safe navigation routes without grasping gravitational dynamics, and you definitely can't predict hazards without knowing how electromagnetic fields interact with ionized gas. Professor Vextar's tentacles are now moving in what appears to be excited agreement. Ms. Martinez, are you describing an integrated approach to cartographic education? I'm describing how humans learned to navigate before we had computers to do our thinking for us. We had to understand the whole system, not just measure individual parts of it. The core representative steps forward again. Ms. Martinez, if you don't mind me asking, what was your background before enrolling at the academy? Luna closes her notebook and grins with the expression of someone who's been waiting for exactly this question. I was a cartographer for the Earth Maritime Survey Division. Spent 15 years mapping ocean currents, weather patterns, and navigational hazards for shipping routes. Before that, I was a wilderness guide in the Rocky Mountains, helping people find their way through terrain that changes with the seasons. The silence that follows is the kind usually reserved for moments when everyone realizes they've been missing something incredibly obvious. You mean, Mathematics Struen's voice sounds like numbers having a revelation. You've been doing this professionally for years. 23 years, actually. Earth's oceans are constantly changing due to currents, weather, and tidal forces. The mountains shift with avalanches, erosion, and seasonal conditions. If you want to make maps that keep people alive, you learn to observe, understand, and predict how natural systems behave over time. And you came here because, Zephyr asks, their circuits flickering with what might be curiosity or electronic embarrassment. Because I wanted to see if the same principles worked in space. Turns out, whether you're mapping ocean currents or stellar gas flows, the basic approach is the same. Pay attention, ask questions, and remember that natural systems are dynamic, not static. Professor Vextar's skin has shifted to a shade that suggests profound academic excitement mixed with the realization that his entire educational philosophy might need updating. Mr. Tyranez, he says carefully, would you be willing to consider a more permanent position with the Academy, perhaps as a visiting professor of applied cartographic methodology? Luna looks around the auditorium at all the faces staring at her with expressions ranging from amazement to professional envy to grudging respect. Her gaze lingers on the expensive equipment that had failed so spectacularly, then shifts to her simple notebook. You know what? I think I'd like that. But I have one condition. What condition? The course has to include field work, real field work, where students learn to observe and analyze without relying on their equipment. They need to understand that technology is a tool, not a substitute for thinking. Agreed, Vextar says immediately. And, Luna adds with a grin, everyone has to bring their own pencils. The laughter that fills the auditorium is genuine this time, the kind that comes from recognizing a fundamental truth that's been hiding in plain sight. As the crowd begins to disperse, students approach Luna with questions about her methods, requests for tutoring, and what appear to be offers to trade their expensive equipment for lessons in basic observation techniques. Work wobbles over, still shifting through various shades of amazement. Luna, I can't believe you just revolutionized galactic cartography with a notebook. I didn't revolutionize anything, Luna says, tucking her pencil behind her ear. I just reminded everyone that the most sophisticated instrument in the universe is still the space between your ears. Everything else is just fancy tools to help you use it better. She looks around at the students clustered around displays of malfunctioning equipment, then back at her simple notebook. Besides, she adds with the kind of smile that suggests the adventure is just beginning, wait until they see what we can do when we combine human observation techniques with alien spatial analysis abilities. The galaxy's going to need a lot more pencils. As the lights dim in the auditorium, and the last of the expensive equipment is wheeled away for repairs that may or may not restore their faith in technology, Luna Martinez sits in the front row, already sketching plans for her first lesson, in a notebook that costs less than most students spend on lunch. Sometimes, the most revolutionary discoveries come not from building something more complex, but from remembering something simple that everyone forgot was important. And sometimes, the best way to map the future is with a pencil, some paper, and the willingness to pay attention to what's actually there instead of what you expect to find.